Is Jackie going to be able to make it today?
I just sent a chat.
Oh.
You're not muted, Wes.
Yeah, I was going to send you a reply to.
Okay, it is 1:31 by my clock, so we'll call the meeting to order. And in attendance, we have Councillor Broadhead and myself, and also we have Councillor Hughes and Councillor Mackay. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Broadhead. Those in favor? That is unanimous. We'll move on to appointments. We don't have any appointments. Approval of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions to the minutes? Could I have a mover of the minutes? Councillor Broadhead. Those in favor? That is unanimous. We're on to item 6, new business. 6.1, solar farm business case. Kate Polkowski.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. I am just going.
Okay, I guess first, sorry, just one thing. I guess first I should ask, is there anybody here at this meeting who wants to speak about this item on this call?
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Yes.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. O'Fleur.
I just received an email moments ago. There might be someone wanting to speak. I've asked Cheryl to look into it. That person may have registered too late. I'm not sure. But
Okay.
in any event, it does no harm to have Ms. Polkowski go first.
Okay.
If there is someone else that they can speak after that,
All right. Okay. Thank you.
we'll
Okay.
let you know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Please proceed, Ms. Polkowski.
Thank you. And just confirming, can you see my screen? Perfect. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to come and share a little bit of the opportunity that we've been looking at from my side of the world in terms of both energy and solar revenues from a long-term perspective for the city. So I'll be providing some overview. I've tried not to get too much into the weeds, but it's kind of important that we have a little bit of an understanding of how the grid and the solar programs and the different levels of them work throughout the province. So I am taking some time to go through that as we get into the presentation. Now, when we talk about the overall energy for the city, it's important to take that kind of step back and look at, we've got two different kinds of opportunities within the city. There's the long-term energy planning and energy utilization for our existing facilities as we grow and as we sort of cycle our life cycle costing for the city. So whether that's energy optimization, technology upgrades, LED retrofits, and behind the meter programs like cogen and solar. So that would be similar to what we have at transit and going into public works right now. And then we can take a look at the second opportunity, which would be long-term community generation and small-scale solar developments throughout the city. And these would be connected directly to the distribution system and selling electricity exclusively to the grid. So when you look specifically at solar, there's two different kinds of things. There's programs that are behind the meter, so they generally are on rooftops, like we have at transit right now. They are sized to support the energy requirements of that facility, and as energy needs go up and down throughout the course of the day, at times they sell to the grid and gain some level of profit when they sell to the grid. And then when their lights are on or things are functioning within their buildings, they are using the energy that they are generating. Those are the behind the meter programs. They're micro generation. We have one that's been in operation for a little bit of time, and then we have the public works one that's going to be built this summer. And then we look at in front of the meter programs. Now, these are exclusively designed and constructed to be selling to the grid consistently. So they don't have agreements, or they don't function that they provide the building with any electricity. They're constantly selling to the grid at that traded market value. So the interesting piece with solar is the price of electricity throughout Alberta fluctuates depending on the need, because we have the power pole, et cetera. So generally the highest need for electricity is midday, between that 11 a.m. and kind of 2 p.m. period of time. And that's when electricity draw is the greatest. And that's when solar produces the highest efficiency. So it sort of capitalizes, interestingly enough, on that highest draw on the electrical grid. When we talk about solar programs, there are 3 different levels of solar that Alberta has access to. So microgeneration, that's less than 5 megawatts, that's behind the meter. It's looking to load offset for buildings. So it's sized to support its maximum sizing would be to support the building itself or the facility itself. And at times it's able to export to the grid, but it is sized for the building. Then you would get into small scale generation. Now, these are generally less than 25 megawatts, and they are distribution connected. So if you think about the electrical lines that are within your city, it connects to those types of lines and sells to the grid exclusively. So it's constantly pushing out electricity to the grid and then going to an end user. And that would be called, that's what we call community generation. And then you would get into the utility scale generation, which is transmission line connected. So those are, and this would relate to any type of microgeneration. So with like any type of electrical generation. So whether it was wind farms or solar, any types of those. So it's just a generalized regulation. But the utility scale, there are like the 100 megawatt systems that are connected directly to the transmission system. And there is some limitations within the regulations on those particular types of systems. So we are focusing on that small scale generation. It's capitalizing on the inherent capacity within the distribution system and not needing to go to those big lines. So to be eligible for a community generation type of program, it has to be a renewable source of electricity. It is connecting to the grid specifically, and it's sized to fit within those parameters. So no differently that when you think of a pipe, there's certain capacity in the pipe, and same with your electrical distribution system. There's certain capacity within those electrical lines that they can handle, and they eventually hit their max load. So you do have to size your facilities to capitalize on the built-in inherent capacity within the distribution system. They export directly to the grid, and they are just passive price takers. So they are constantly trading with the market as prices fluctuate. Eligible community groups are kind of cooperative, educational boards, municipalities, societies, and amongst many others. There's an entire list of who is eligible to capitalize on community generation. Throughout Alberta, I've provided a mapping of the energy economy throughout Alberta, and it is relatively diverse from both the south to the north of Alberta. So this isn't a new parameter. We are capitalizing on something that has been going on in Alberta for quite some time. When we talk community scale solar, the projects are relatively straightforward, but they do take a little bit of time. Generally speaking, you're looking at approximately 1.5 to 2 years to get everything done. You can fast track some of the pieces by truncating them together, but you would start off with a feasibility study and get your technical documentation together from your geotech, from your environmental, from your glint glare studies, all those pieces that are extremely necessary to make informed decisions on whether you are continuing to go forward. Have that stakeholder engagement, and then you would submit to the utility commission for their review and final approval. Once you have that, then you would go down that procurement and construction step. And as you refine your project, your investment goes up. So the nice thing about solar is it's not a high upfront investment where you're getting all your pieces together to inform you. It is your major investment does come at the tail end when you start construction. From a project development perspective, again, as you go through all those pieces, you tend to refine the steps and the process of your project. So in terms of providing that feasibility and that context of your program, you're looking at locations. And important to consider, not all locations are considered equal when it comes to solar. You're looking at topography, the existing connections that you have access to, your environmental components. You would do an update, you would update your regulatory components and do a high level economic projections based on the siting of your facility. Most communities or most entities that look at community scale generation, they are looking at 3 or 4 different land parcels and then sort of narrowing down the field in terms of where they're looking at. And right now we are only looking at one, which is a little bit more unique, but not completely uncommon. Once you get through some of those feasibility components, you then get into 2 different aspects. You get into the choices that you're going to make and how you're going to be phasing your funding. Now, your choices include like the technology that you'd be doing. So whether it be fixed or articulating, the scale, the configuration, how you're going to physically connect, again, confirm with the regulations. And then marketing is also within here, which is an interesting component. But because you would be producing a green energy, you do have the ability to develop third-party agreements with other companies or municipalities that want to have goals and aspirations to be 100% green energy by a certain date. And you can have that, they can purchase your specific green energy at a premium, and then through the regulator, they would be issued a bill at the end of the year and then provide you the ultimate, that consolidation of fees at the end of the year. So it's an interesting opportunity which has not been built into the business case today, but is out there. And so it is important to link your marketing if you're going to go down that path. And then your funding sources. So whether you'd be debt financing, whether you'd be looking at equity investment, cooperatives from a solar perspective are also very common, as well as grants. We were looking at large scale grants from the feds last week. And there, at this scale of projects, there are additional grants out there that we have access to that we've never really had access to before for any kind of solar development. Then, so once you get some of those more, I'll say, detailed design components delineated, then you start looking at your annual outputs from your execution of your project. So the total energy that you'll be producing, your load demand, your CO2 offsets, your power pool offsets. So because you'd be connected to the distribution system, your distribution system doesn't necessarily have to pull from the power pool as much during that peak demand. So you're issued credits because you are mitigating that pull, because solar would have the highest efficiency during that peak period of time, which is, and they are required through regulation to provide that credit back to the generator. And then looking at your investment, so final regulatory approvals, the interconnection, the equipment costs, and the installation cost. So then you'd have the pieces to then get into your operation of your system. So the physicality of your energy sales, your wire savings and credits, your offsets from the power pool, and then the community benefits, because there's community benefits that are attributed to this, from the education pieces that can go with that to the additional programming around that, just to provide the community with a value of what this green asset can provide. And again, there are costs attributed to it as well, from an O&M perspective, the capital repayment, as well as the taxes on the property. And then you have your annual benefit from your net income, any employment opportunities, the environmental relief that are attributed, as well as your economic benefit. So solar throughout Alberta is very interesting. So the mapping on the right shows the solar index throughout Alberta, and as you can see, Alberta is kind of uniquely positioned to have a high solar index and provide that extremely high efficiency of solar panels. And the costing of solar has really decreased. So since 2010, solar panels itself have come down 85% in price. And like Bloomberg's estimating that by 2030, it will undercut the commissioned coal and gas. So there is an opportunity. I think recently we've seen a huge investment at EIA for solar from foreign investment. So again, Alberta is a uniquely positioned community and land location to really capitalize on solar investment. So when we talk about the development of a community scale solar plan, the first thing we look at is the location selection. So looking at topography, the interconnections, the geotechnical, and geotechnical tends to actually be the most the item that you have the most uncertainty to when it comes to solar, because you never really know what's under the soil. Now at Badgerlands itself, where the recommendations are proposing at the back end, we have quite a bit of information of what that looks like today because of the studies we've done. But generally speaking, it tends to be an unknown in most solar programs, as well as setbacks. So setbacks are delineated by the province for solar, and vary from 3 meters to 1,000 meters from named water bodies, depending on what land parcel you're looking at. And then you get into your detailed design and modeling. So kind of your fixed racking, your row spacing, the loads, the credits you'd be getting, your offsets, and those types of pieces. So we've done a high level modeling based on the information and the common tables that we can find from the regulators. But as you get more refined in terms of how you lay things out, if there is any shading that happens, you're able to refine those numbers and get better numbers to kind of provide your long-term financial modeling too. So the solar program that we have proposed is a three stages of a phase plan to build 15 megawatts. So staying within that community generation program. So 3 5-megawatt developments where the total investment will be approximately $33 million over 15 years. So in conjunction with my colleagues in finance, we've provided sort of the modeling based on the revenues you received, the cost of the debenture, and so then the net revenue at the end of the day on an annual basis. So we wanted to make sure that any of the business cases we put forward did provide the funding to support itself, including the O&M. This particular model is only based on a 25-year model. So we are seeing solar panels that are functioning up to 40 years right now down in California. With kind of a 10% decreased efficiency over that last 10 years. So again, still functioning really well. This is only based on a 25-year model. So over 25 years, there's a $29 million cumulative net revenue that would be seen. So extending that further, you would see more of the debentures fall off and the revenues would continue to increase over that period of time. And what hasn't been built into here is we haven't built in any grants. We additionally haven't built in any third-party agreements to sell green energy to any third party. So if the city wanted to kind of provide that long-term projection that they were going to be green, utilize the green energy, that's fantastic. Or if they did want to actualize any of those third-party agreements, the opportunity is there, and it would just be sort of another level of revenue off the top end. And so I wanted to provide kind of the solar end of life process, as solid waste is one of my departments in my portfolio. It's really important to me to have an understanding of what these look like at the end of its lifespan. So there's 2 different types of solar PV. There's silicone based and thin film based. The majority of the materials within each of those types of panels is actually glass, and current recycling processes today can actually handle the majority of those pieces. So we are looking at a 96% efficiency of recycling those processes today, and I only expect it'll increase as we go forward. So I just wanted to provide that kind of full picture perspective of what happens to these panels at the end of the day, because there's more and more panels going up throughout the world and within Alberta, and it is really important to understand where they are going to be when they are no longer in operational use. So the recommendations before you is that $200,000 is funded from the stabilization reserve to support the preliminary and detailed design requirements of the full-scale solar farm, and that administration provide an update to council upon completion of the detailed design of the solar farm by Q2 2021, that a borrowing bylaw be brought forward to you to support the implementation of the presented solar farm business case in 2021, and that Badgerlands be allocated to support the long-term development of a solar as a green energy industry within the city. Are there any questions?
Okay, are there any questions of Councillor Broadhead?
I just, before I get to my questions, just a procedural question. Did we find out if we had anybody wanting to speak to this, or?
Yes, we have Mike Killick who wants to speak. I was going to hear him after we ask questions of Ms. Bukalski.
After or before?
I was going to ask him after. but maybe.
You're the chair, so I'll continue on.
To comment on that. Is there a procedure on when we are supposed to hear Mr. Killick?
It's totally in your discretion. It would, often we hear from the public before administration says anything. However, I would suggest to you, sir, that having heard from Ms. Polkowski, it's probably better to follow through with the questions. And then who knows, from the exchange, it may be that some of the concerns that Mr. Killick has are even answered. So
I would agree. I would agree also. Thank you for those comments. Proceed if you have any questions, Mr. Broadhead, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I'm just looking at the summary costs. They're basically around 11 million for every stage in the for every
Every 5-year window, yeah. So there'd be a little bit less, but the reality is the majority of the design work is going to be done, would be done kind of, I'll call it year 0. For 200,000, it would encompass kind of the 3-phased approach, and you would just do your investment at that localized phase. So again, nothing would preclude council from truncating the phasing or doing it in less phases. I just thought it was a easier way of kind of mitigating a huge upfront cost in any one particular year.
Okay, fair enough. So, and these costs are under the assumption that St. Albert receives no granting, right?
Correct.
So granting would just take right off the top then, right? So 33 minus whatever grants we receive.
That's correct. So obviously there is grants out there. One of Diane's folks just contacted me last week with a huge opportunity. So again, we would pursue every opportunity that was available to kind of make the business case even better.
Okay. So just, I got to tell you, when I read this report, I understood where you were going with this. What I didn't understand, and maybe you can go into it a little bit for me, is why you chose the Badger land, which, you know, to me would be right in the middle of residential St. Albert, as opposed to suggesting it go into, you know, Lakeview Business District, light industrial. So maybe I'm just not understanding something, if you could.
Oh, great question. So not all land's created equal when it comes to solar. Like that is the baseline for it. So there was one, so I was proposing the back end of Badger where we have contaminated soils to capitalize on what is more marginal soils. So we aren't going to get the same value for the back end of Badger that we would for the front end of Badger, for one, because it is salt contaminated. And secondly, there is robust interconnection very close to it. So if you go to the bottom of kind of Badger at that west corner, you've got like a substation that you can get a close connection to. Whereas when you go further west, you have a less robust electrical system as you go that way. Again, we can look at it. So nothing precludes during that first phasing to look at multiple parcels. It's not uncommon, but not all land is created equal. And as soon as you have a longer interconnection, that really changes the economics of it, from the efficiency of the distribution to the cost of actually putting your interconnection in.
Okay. So, well, it's interesting because we'd probably be talking a kilometer. So is it that, or 2 kilometers at max from Lakeview Business District to Badger? Like order of magnitude, is that -10, -20% on your return, or what?
I bet it would probably cost better part of a couple $1,000,000 to do that connection if you had to go up there. As an example, like Red Deer has like a 2 megawatt system right downtown. So embedded within their residential area, they have a 2 megawatt system. So it's not uncommon that they're in urban areas. The farther you go out, you have more a challenge to connect when it comes to a bigger program.
See, there you go. I learned something today. So the further away you get, the more it costs to actually put it in, and then the return of it. Okay, fair enough. What are the risks do you see here?
I guess there's a couple, right? So there's a couple of things we can look at is what you'd ultimately want to do with Badger lands is one for sure. But it doesn't mean in 30 years when servicing is up there or when the solar panels are at the end of their lifespan that Badger can't be redeveloped to something different. That's not an impossibility. And again, you are looking at your contamination getting in a lower probably level as things are diluting. It might be depending on what things are at. So there's those pieces are there. The risk, the risk could be is you spend the 200,000 and the studies say it's a bad location to connect to. There's no room in the distribution system because I can't do that up front and know that information for you today until I do the work.
Yeah, fair enough. Last question. You talked in your presentation that proximity to water bodies demands setback. Carrot Creek, if we were to take a look at the Lakeview Business District or even down by Big Lake, but just explain that to me. How do they calculate setbacks there?
You bet. So I have a listing of what the setbacks will be from depending on the level of wetland that you have. Wetland setbacks vary from 5 meters to 30 meters depending on the tiered of wetland. When it gets to water courses that Carrot Creek would be considered, you're talking 100-meter setback. Then when you get to named lakes, which is kind of Big Lake, you're talking 1,000-meter setbacks. Provincial highways, you're looking at 70 to 40-meter setback depending on the primary or secondary. Country roads, you're looking at 45.72 meters setback. Coulees and valleys, which we don't really have in this area, 100 meters. And then landowner setbacks would be 3 meters. Now, roads are 45, so when you have a road in there, it kind of trumps the setback from a landowner.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. So the first question is, why are we using the stabilization reserve to fund this? Why aren't we using the capital reserve?
I'd have to give that to Diane McMorty. I'm not 100. That was the choice that was made, sort of.
Okay. I would suggest to the committee that it should go to the capital and not stabilization. We have 1.3 million in the stabilization. We had 4.8 million in January. We're eating through this as if it's bubblegum. And we don't have money for emergencies soon because we've been eating through it so quickly. So my recommendation, just suggestion, because it's not my committee, is and if it doesn't, I'll ask at council that we use capital reserve and not stabilization. The other question I had is, so motion number 4 and 5 is to take Badger lands off the table before we've even seen the business case. So I'm really wondering why we're putting the cart so much ahead here when we don't know if we're going to go forward with it till we see the business case. And yet motion 4 and 5 were just basically like, just take it off and assume the business case is moving forward as is.
So I'm just trying to clarify what the question is, Councillor Hughes, sorry.
Why do we have motion 4 and 5 there? Because the assumption would be that you'd have to see the business case before you would tell you that Badger lands is now going to be used exclusively for that. And you haven't seen the business case. So we're making a big presumption here that we're just going to automatically agree to the business case when it comes forward and that these lands are no longer necessary for anything else.
For sure. So I guess at this particular point, because the recommendation 2 had administration coming back to council in Q2 2021, we didn't want them to be preemptively distributed out between that time. At Q2 2021, if it was decided that the business case would not go forward, then obviously those lands would go back to having other opportunities attributed to them. I think it was just earmarking them so that it wasn't kind of sold or distributed elsewhere during the sort of limbo time between when we can get things done.
Okay, well, the wording of the motion could reflect that because that's not what it indicates at all. And why are we taking out all of Badger lands for green industry development of solar as green industry for all the Badger lands. Apparently this needs 15 acres, but we're now taking out 80.
So it just was providing a little bit of flexibility on how we cited it. So I didn't want to specify which particular space or arrangement on Badger was allocated. So once we could get that design done, then we could then provide that the back end, or that this subdivision, because you'd have to subdivide the parcels, would be attributed to solar, and then it could be then reallocated elsewhere.
So the
sold,
intention is
obviously.
just to have 15 acres, not all 80.
No, right now it's just 15 acres. Again, if council chose to make it bigger, they can obviously do that. But right now we're looking at a 15-acre, 3-phased approach.
It's just that it says it's taking the whole Badger lands is being supported. So you're telling, because initially you said it's trying to go where the salt contamination is, but now you're telling us
That's ideally where we would like to put it. But again, we don't know the specifics of where we can physically site it until we get the design done.
so it may not go there at all then. We may be putting it on perfectly viable land.
It's unlikely. So part of when we did the calculation was when we put it at the back end, there would be spoil piles that would have to go to landfill. There is salt contamination. So it would optimize on salt contaminated lands, which is kind of the back third or so. And then it would be only the auger spill files that would be required to be landfilled, which substantially reduces kind of a dig and dump or trying to remediate that for an immediate sale perspective.
So one of the things that confused me is like, apparently in the background it says that the revenue is like 8. How much is it per per kilowatt hour? Because my understanding was that when we did the waste to energy, it was not coming in at 8.86 per megawatt hour, unless I was wrong. So why is this? How much are we thinking we're going to sell it for?
So there's a whole, it's a very complicated spreadsheet that builds in what you are actually selling your electricity at, because there's a number of different pieces that come into it. So because you're selling to the distribution system, you get credits for selling during peak time. So that builds into it. And that's generally $30 per megawatt. And this is all on a megawatt perspective that we're working on, because we're now dealing in 15 megawatts. And then you start looking at your carbon credits, which are built into that. And you are also dealing with, because you're this big, because you're a 15 megawatt system directly selling to the grid, to the distribution grid, you are dealing with that fluctuating price. And because solar sells at the highest efficiency during that 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. time, when the draw on the power is the highest, and the value of power is the highest, it actually capitalizes on the highest value of electricity. So the cost, so you can average your cost of electricity over kind of your day, but it doesn't really correlate to what you get for solar. So you kind of model it in like a solar generation valuation model, and then it spits out your cost per year based on that fluctuating price of electricity.
So what's the range that you get? Like,
early in the morning when you're not doing a lot of efficiency, you're selling at, give me a second. You're selling at like $16, or your carbon value, your offset value. So your offset sale price is $12.15 in 2020. Your offset maximum value is $16.20. You get a credit for your intensity at 0.54, and you have access to a carbon levy value, and the projections are $30 per ton in 2020 and up to potentially $50 in 2022. So your overall revenue that you're looking at is $12.15 roughly, based on all the different pieces that come together.
okay.
So
and that's based on how many hours a day though? Like, because
roughly 8. So it does model it as like, so it takes central Alberta, so the Edmonton area, so you get lumped into Edmonton, and it basically models your year based on your solar index and your light span that you get throughout each of the seasons.
Okay. And what is the borrowing rate that you were assuming for our debenture?
I think Diane's looking at that right now.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Diane.
Yep, we have it modeled at 2.51, which was the current ACFA rate when we pulled it. I believe it might have been early June. It was either June or May from ACFA.
Okay. I mean, one of the concerns, so when we do the borrowing, will it be for the full 33 million up front then? Or would it be in a staged approach?
No, it would be in a stage approach. We'd probably look at doing the borrowing bylaw as one consolidated bylaw, but we would only actually take out the borrowings as they were required.
So the amount of interest that we pay, is it whatever when we take the full line of credit out, or is it on the year that the extra debenture comes into play?
Yeah, no, so it's definitely based on when you actually take out the debenture. So you are, working with the most current rates at that time. So that is a risk. 5 years from now, the rates could look different than they do today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned because you're probably aware of the $1 trillion of debt the federal government's put onto everybody, and that typically gets offset by increasing interest rates. So that's one of my concerns. What does 100% D32 mean in your chart on the last page?
Good question. So that's basically your power pool. So because it's a distribution credit, so because you're you're sending as much energy as possible into the grid when people are using the most, generally speaking, the transmission system, the power pool, they would sell at a premium to the grid during that period of time. By regulation, if you offset and add to that power during that peak time, the power pool is required by regulation to give you those credits and pay you for that.
Okay.
As a premium on top of what you're making.
Do we have any carbon credits that are owed to us from what we've done to date on other projects?
Not that
Like,
I know of, perhaps.
Like the electric buses, for example. Does that give us anything or nothing? I'm not asking you, I'm just asking anybody who knows, like Mr. Scopel might know. Do we have any projects so far that have earned us carbon credits?
Christian might know.
Hey, good afternoon. For the electric buses specifically, we did look in carbon credits as a result of that project. The understanding was that because we received federal grant funding for our electric buses, we were no longer eligible for carbon offsets.
Okay, so to date, we haven't done anything to get carbon credits. Is that correct?
We've investigated a couple of different energy efficiency projects as well as energy generation. Neither have met the threshold of carbon offset at this point.
Okay. Now, are we still storing the snow on the Badgerlands? Because my understanding is we haven't built it somewhere else.
So the Badgerlands didn't host our snow, like our city removed snow. It was private commercial snow. So if there was appetite to move this project forward, then the next steps would be to connect with the private entities, like the businesses that use that site for free, and let them know that they would have to find another site to dump their snow.
So where do we dump our snow?
In Edmonton.
We dump it all in Edmonton.
I believe so. Mr. Lake might have to provide that specification, but we don't use that site.
Okay, so I'm bewildered right now because you're telling us that we let commercial development or commercial businesses dump their snow on our land, which is causing a liability because of the salt. And we said, go ahead. Who dreamt this idea up? I'm trying to figure out the rationale.
We're kind of debating here about the.
No, but I'm trying to understand.
About the issues of a project here, solar, not really about past contamination of the land. A lot of discussions about the past contamination of the land.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to be asking that later as an information request, just a heads up. Okay, so the maintenance costs. You said 30,000, which was the same price as the waste to energy maintenance costs. So are we including like dust removal and all of that as well in there?
No. So generally speaking, solar programs of these scale, you don't do dust removal. The snow melts on the solar panels themselves. You don't actually have to clear the snow off the solar panels. What is in that $30,000, and it's probably really fluffy, like it's probably too much money right now, is managing the access road from a snow perspective. So clearing the snow, like grading the snow from a snow perspective, and mowing the lawn. That's it.
Every time I've seen anybody who has solar, they they clean them because it increases the ability for it to work better. But we're not planning to clean them.
No. When you talk solar of this particular scale and panels of this quality, so again, it's a different quality than people put on the top of
Okay.
their roofs. The value is not in cleaning them.
And we're not taking the snow off of them either.
Nope.
They're going to work through the snow.
They end up melting the snow actually. So they're at generally speaking, a 45-degree tilt angle. And because of even in -30, -40-degree weather, they're able with the solar gradient and the heat that they generate off them, because it is solar PV, they actually melt their panels.
Okay. So
Again, if you
Mhm.
look at attachment 2, I'd like to say, it goes through some of the projects throughout Alberta, Fort Chip being the most northern. And again, they are not looking to clean their panels whatsoever either.
if we were to just sell this land, how much would it cost to clean up the salt?
Christian might have that answer.
Hi, Councillor Hughes. We have some pretty high-level estimates that were provided to council earlier this year. We've proposed a business case in the last few years to do a delineation of the cost of contamination of that site. So it depends sort of on the level of which you're looking to remediate. It depends on the purpose of the land. But we have some very, very high-level estimates I believe that were provided from our Department of Engineering.
Okay, and I don't remember what they are. Can you send them to us again, if nothing else? Because I don't remember what specifically those numbers are right now.
Yep, I can make a note, have that resent to you guys. I believe there's a slot memo, and I can't, off the top of my head, I don't have the number.
Okay, and then how much in grants would be a reasonable expectation?
That's really tough to say. We've included none right now. A tool sent me a huge grant that is available from the feds right now that they just announced, and there is a access of up to $10 million there, depending if you have a project that is past that $30 million stage. So I would be amiss to sort of put a number on the table of what we could achieve realistically.
Because it appears to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's that we're basically approving $11 million, because then a future council would approve another 11 and a future council would approve another 11, right? So we're not doing a 33 million up front because it's being distributed over multiple timeframes. So,
but I think we would do a consolidated borrowing bylaw. So this particular council would do a $33 million borrowing bylaw that would just slowly be drawn on year 1, 5, and 10 type thing.
I'm just thinking for the grants. It's just that it's not a 33 million approved. It's an $11 million approved until the next phase.
Correct.
So
correct.
Okay. So I'm just trying, if we think like a third, like what is the range? 10% to 30, or I don't know what would be a remotely, because I feel like it's a carrot that I don't even know how to chomp on it, quite frankly.
Honestly, I have no idea. I'm sorry. I'd have to connect with a tool to see what his gut would be, but I think it would be a gut at the end of the day. And I don't think it would be a number we'd want to put our hat on.
Okay. The other thing is, you mentioned that most of it was glass, but we're collecting glass, but we're not recycling it. So is there a place that we're going to be recycling it?
So we do sell our glass, like our glass goes for additional sandblasting, right? So we at the Mike Mitchell recycling facility, we do glass, and then it is taken by a third party, and it is completely reused for sandblasting processes today.
Oh, so we found a use for it then, because last time I hadn't, but we do have a use. We could advertise that we have a use for that, because you know, like that might be something worth mentioning. That's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I had some questions. You said we have how long have we owned the Badger land?
How long?
Yeah, how long have we owned it?
I am not 100% sure. I'm sorry, Councillor Watkins. I'd have to get that answer probably from Adrian.
Has it been 15 years, 10, 15 years? Yeah, and so there really haven't been in a big rush to do anything with it. We've owned it 15 years to date. Did you say that for $33 million in costs over 15 years, the net revenue was $29 million?
That's correct. So after over a 25-year period, yes.
Over a 25-year period, 15 years of cost for $33 million, $29 million of net revenue to the city projected over 15 years, right? Correct? Or
Nope.
25?
So debenturing your investments over a 25-year debenture, the net revenue over 25 years would be $29 million.
Okay, and that's no grants included whatsoever.
That's correct.
And if we included grants, that would make that number even better. Is that correct?
Yeah, you bet.
Right. And you said that 96% of the glass panels is presently recyclable. Is that correct?
They are, yeah. It's quite prevalent throughout Europe that they're starting to recycle them. And then obviously California's had solar panels in operation for 40 years now. And so they are now really starting to break down solar panels and kind of optimize their recycling process specifically for solar panels.
Right. In the back part of the Badgerlands, that's where we're planning on, is one of the places we could put this. You're right. You said that the study could include a recommendation of all sorts of other places, not just the Badgerlands. So we really shouldn't just focus on the Badgerlands. Is that correct? We could do that?
Yeah, we could do that, yeah.
And is the back portion of the Badgerlands the part that's contaminated with salt? This is probably a question of Mr. Benson. In order to clean that up for the highest and best use, which would probably be residential, which we've looked at for a long time, those are the most stringent regulations which require the highest cleanup level possible, right?
Yep, you're correct. The receptors for residential are the highest criteria for remediation.
Right. So it would cost us the most to clean that land up to a residential grade so that it would be compatible with the land that's next door, which is residential, correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
And if we put a solar farm on it, we don't have to clean it up at this point, do we?
We have a management plan registered with the government of Alberta. As long as we own the property, we're not obligated to perform remediation, but we do have to maintain a management plan. So similar to a lot of other contaminated sites that we have in the city, or even privately owned sites that other corporations have, as long as they own the life of the asset and it doesn't change the purpose of the property, there's no obligation to remediate.
And just a question of there was a concern raised that this could be, if it's by residential and why isn't it in an industrial area? And this type of use is very non-invasive, is it not? There's no odors created from it. There's no smoke created from it. There's no noise created from it, is there?
No, and one of the original studies that have to happen in your technical documents is a glint glare study, both for your residential folks around that, as well as any wildlife and environmental factors. So that is one of the front end pieces that gets done.
Okay, so one of the main concerns would be glint glare from the panels, but we're going to study that before we move ahead with it, and wildlife, and we're going to study that before we make a decision on whether we're going to move ahead with it. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And then I had another question, I think, and if this is probably of Ms. McMorty, there was concern raised about interest rates going up and that we don't know interest rates. Well, nobody can predict interest rates. Nobody has a crystal ball and can tell you what interest rates are 6 months from now or 1 year from now. But say if interest rates went up 3 points, which is probably not going to happen, 3 points, would it still make money for the positive?
I'd have to go through and redo that modeling.
Your guess,
I think I can.
Expert in, it would probably still make, if it makes 29 million net on 33 million, 2 points on the interest rate, it's probably not going to make the big money. It's probably a fair assumption, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely reduce the profitability of it for sure, but I would just want to run the numbers.
Still could make piles of money. I think that's, maybe I had another question. Oh yeah, and the reason why we looked at the Badgerland also was its association to the grid, right? So easy access to the grid.
That's correct.
And if we chose some other locations, it could cost us millions more in power line and in underground. You'd probably have to put that underground because people don't really like above ground power. We're putting underground power lines to this thing, and you're probably adding millions of dollars of cost if you're putting it far away from the infrastructure. Is that correct?
That's correct. And you also have to look at the capacity in the distribution system of where you do your specific connection. If there's no capacity there, then you're not really eligible to do the project in that location.
Right. And the last question, I think I know the answer to it and ask you anyways, but electrical substations, they're in all sorts of residential neighborhoods all over the place, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Okay, those are my questions. Anybody else have any questions? Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thanks for asking a lot of the questions to all the other council members. Pretty much, I only have one left. The 200K, Kate.
Yep.
How is that going to be split out? Like, what is that going to engage third party, or is that just going to be a staff time?
Nope.
What is that going to be?
Third party. So although Christian is extremely knowledgeable in this area, we are probably better suited to have Christian run with the project and manage it, and have a third party do all the technical design and kind of all the connections with the regulators and all those pieces. So it is pretty complicated when you get down to into the kind of detailed modeling of this.
Is my fear will be, is that enough? You're going to come back? Like, I mean, are we
I am
going to?
conservative.
Oh. Okay. So you think that that'll be more than enough?
I do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. So if this was to be rehabilitated and was to be sold and used, let's say for R1, what would we be expecting for that same 15 acres in tax revenue? From tax revenue, from 15 acres of R1, for example?
I think we'd have to get back to you with that, Councillor Hughes.
Okay.
Fine.
I mean, when this comes back to council, if we could have that information, that would be quite helpful. Because I'm also just looking at the Welsh opportunity cost. So if we decide to go down this way, it would generate 29 over 35 years, which is less than $1 million a year. I'm wondering if we were to renovate it for, I'm just throwing a number out there, so I don't have any, let's say 4 or 5 million. That would be a $5 million investment, and we could potentially make even more if it was gone down a different path. So I'd just like to know what the cost opportunity cost.
You could also clean it up and sell it in 30 or 40 years or whatever as R1 at that time.
Yeah, but it's just going forward right now, what the cost would be to get, say, R1. We could do R1 and R3, quite frankly, and versus do this option. The other question I have, the last one I have right now, and thank you everybody for your patience, is the 200,000. I'm trying to figure out why it would cost so much for a business case. The MUC, which had many moving parts, was 150,000, and this is coming in even higher on what was been presented to us to be as a straightforward case.
So this isn't about the business case, Councillor Hughes. This is
Okay.
about so there's 3 things that have to happen to kind of get to your business case from a solar program perspective. You do your feasibility study, your preliminary design, and then your detailed design. All those pieces together provide you with the information to get your financial modeling in a detailed perspective done. So there's a number of moving parts that have to get done. And so I say to Councillor Mackay, I have enough money in 200,000, but it's going to take roughly close to that to get it done.
Okay.
Like, we're going to do an environmental assessment, a geotechnical assessment. We're going to do a glint and glare study, an environmental assessment. So there's a lot of pieces to make sure that everybody's looking at the same thing and is okay with it.
Okay. When this comes to council, is this approving? This is, to me, it looks like you're basically approving moving forward when it comes to council, I guess, in August. Because I was thinking it was like, we're going to give you a whole detailed thing and then decide, but it looks like it's.
I can't give you any more details than what I have today without spending money to get them.
I understand that, but it's also looking like it's not pending. Like, this looks like we're deciding to move forward with it now, is what the motions seem to be to me. It's that we move forward with it now, we do the boring bylaw when we have the detailed design, but there's no more questions about whether or not you want to move forward after this.
So you'd see a presentation and report at Q2 2021, which is kind of your next trigger point that you could pull back. So at that point, we'd probably have spent a good portion of the $200,000 and have some of those details that then we can have. Like, one motion at that point could be we continue to move forward. The alternative motion could be that we stop the program and we're not comfortable moving forward. So that's kind of your next trigger point that you would see to whether you are comfortable continuing or going in a different direction.
And just one more thing, just to help me understand your chart.
Yes, so, you betcha.
Okay, so because there's 3 spots, we do 1, 2, 3 is what we're doing, right? But I would assume that 1 would be in year 1. But you don't have the revenue coming until it bumps up really until year 5. So I'm trying to figure out why there's that delay from, is it because it's not installed? Like, I'm assuming it wouldn't take, nope. Is year 1 the year that it's actually installed, or is it today?
Yeah, so year one, no, not today. So year one would be in like a year from now when we pull the debenture, we get things installed, we get the first phase installed that summer, right? It
Okay.
gets up and running in the fall or kind of early winter type thing. It takes about a year for your panels to gain their efficiency. So do you see in year one, you've got a blue line that is a little bit lower, and then by year two, it sort of pops up a little bit?
Yes.
So that is your panels gaining their efficiency over their first year. So then that orange chart at the bottom is that consistent debenture that you've pulled. So that $11 million that you pulled in year one,
Okay.
and you're paying your payments on it. Then that gray line is your consolidated net revenue over that first to fourth year. And then in year five, you're making that jump to the next kind of level of panels in essence.
So it looks like there's 4 jumps then.
Well, not necessarily 4 jumps per se. So you'll see an increase in efficiency. And as your system operates and as you gain certain thresholds, you have access to a different sort of tabled value for your offsets, etc. So it's not as simple as just year one it costs you this, year 5 it costs you this, year 10 it costs you this. As you gain efficiency and as you hit that next threshold, the values change. You also see like when you pull the Alberta Utility Commission's tables, they project their values over quite a period of time, 30 years. So then you see the fluctuating values for what they're projecting on items on those. So the revenues reflect that as well.
Okay. So I see at year 10, we have the third thing. And then there's like that 4-year delay before it suddenly bumps up and then it stays flatlined there. So what happens between year 13 and 14 that caused that consolidation that didn't happen before that?
A change in the rate in the Alberta Utilities Commission.
Or so we know that. Why?
Yeah,
are we predicting that?
so they have tables that project their rates out 35 years. So you pull them when you kind of do your preliminary modeling like this. So you'll see a slight jump between 9 and 10. So do you see your blue bar chart between 9 and 10? So that's the incremental jump of that extra 5 megawatts that take you to 15. Okay. Right? So then at your like 14, there was a change in their projected rates that then kind of extended beyondward. So they generally project that the needs of the power pool go up by 3% every year. So they may have projected another plant coming offline or a need to a reduced access to that, which increases the value of energy. So
and that makes sense. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so you basically pull their tables and sort of kind of size of unit with the tables kind of output to your value.
Got it. Lots of math.
Yeah.
I would be curious as to what the amount would be. I understand that it's projecting 0.9 million, so there's some wiggle room. But I would be curious as to what it would be if we didn't have that increased jump and the rates didn't happen as predicted.
Sure, that's pretty easy to model. Yeah, that's
Okay.
pretty easy to model. Yeah, it's all in it. I've done it all in Excel when I've pulled out my numbers, so it's pretty easy to change it and model that. The other thing that would be reasonable if you were looking to decrease it and get a better modeling of it is right now we've only modeled a 25-year time frame, which takes our third panels only to 10 years old, right? So realistically, we should be projecting taking offline or reducing the efficiency of our first phase models at year kind of 30 and projecting things out to kind of a 40-year time span for each of our phases.
That would be helpful as well. Just
You
so
betcha.
that we know what the full investment is versus the full output. That would be helpful as well if we could have that when it comes back.
You bet. I can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Broadhead, did you have another question? You're muted still.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering around the motions. I think Councillor Hughes brought up something that should be reflected in the motion in some verbiage that the Badger lands will just be sort of held in abeyance pending the review of the business case but that the decision, as it reads here, kind of looks to me like the Badger lands are taken offline too. So I don't know how you do that from a motion perspective. Maybe somebody can advise, but if we were to go, I have no problem with the first three. The last two are somewhat need some work from my perspective.
Okay, so do you have a suggestion on the wording, or would you like?
I'm looking for a suggestion.
Would you like to previous? Let me read the fifth. What's the fifth one again here? No previous motion. Well, why don't we just remove 4 and 5 and vote on 3, because the Badger land is presently not on the market for sale. Just on a note, like, the real estate market really isn't booming along right now, and I don't think there's a lot of buyers for the Badger land for residential, especially contaminated residential. So I'm not really too concerned about us trying to move the Badger land that quickly. The cleaning the contamination is going to take years anyways. And like I said, the market for that land is it's not what people think it is, considering the current economic climate. So I would, if we want, we could remove the last 2 points. And if there comes an offer on the Badger land, we bring it to council and deal with it in the meantime. Maybe there's somebody else who has a comment on that. Mr. LaFleur has a comment on that. Unmute yourself, Mr. LaFleur.
Mr. Chair, not specifically on that. I was just going.
We can't hear you, Mr. LaFleur. You froze. And you're cutting in and out. Can anybody else hear David? Because I cannot hear what he's saying. No, we can't hear you.
But Mr. Killick hasn't had a chance to speak yet either.
I know. I'm going to give Mr. Killick an opportunity to speak as soon as we finish asking questions. We haven't finished asking questions yet, because there were quite a few questions. Waiting for Mr. LaFleur to come back on to provide us with some clarification here.
Mr. Chair, didn't Councillor Broadhead put forward a CI in relation to the Badger lands? Has that been answered?
There's an outstanding CI, but there's also, I think, recommendation number 5 sort of deals with the when the community amenities report came forward. There's a motion there, and I understand there's some historical motions too. So there's a number of motions, and hopefully David can get back online here because I think he's familiar with most of them. So there's a history of motions related to Badger that may need to be dealt with.
Okay, there's David online again, and he is unmuted. So please proceed.
Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
You can. Oh, good. I don't know what happened for him. My apologies. Okay, so part of what I was going to ask Mr. Chairman is whether you'd want to maybe consider hearing
David, why don't you type it into the chat? Why don't you type it into the chat, and we'll go and listen to Mr. Killick.
Or David, try turning off your video, because then it's not using bandwidth for your video, and then they can hear. Yeah, now speak. Maybe that'll work.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. You get a choice of either seeing me or hearing me.
Okay.
Well, it's between the between the devil and the deep blue sea, I guess. Okay. So what I was going to do first was suggest you hear from Mr. Killick first, but of course you're going to do that. But also the point being that if this is going in the direction it appears to of saying let's perhaps recommend, and obviously it's a recommendation only, council would have to decide that we start doing the engineering or the planning for a solar farm. You really wouldn't even need the last 3 recommendations. Only the first 2 would really be all you would need. So just wanted to point that out.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. We could remove the last 2. Okay, at this point,
the last 3. You wouldn't even need the last 3. Yeah.
Okay, at this point, we'll go to Mr. Killick. You can make your presentation.
Well, good afternoon, members of council. Thank you very much for letting me speak today. And glad that Kathy made the recommendation of turning off video to give all the bandwidth over to audio. That's a pretty common problem that we have on these Zoom calls. And I'd also like to thank the mayor for her Facebook post on the weekend that brought this particular item to my attention. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't have been aware of it. Most of the my questions and comments have been addressed by Councillor Watkins and Councillor Hughes, and now by Mr. LaFleur in terms of taking off those last three items. I personally was concerned that we seem to be jumping ahead with spending this $200,000 on doing both a preliminary and detailed design before we knew exactly what the overall plan was and the location of selecting the Badger lands, and basically saying that this was going to be a kind of a done deal with a preliminary design and then a detailed design right at the outset. I did note that in table 2 that had been provided to council, that's a simple copy and paste of information from the Alberta government website. So there is a lot of good information if you go to that website and look at the particular projects that are listed in that chart number 2. The main thing that when I looked at those, every one of those sites uses land that is essentially contaminated and useless for other things, and including the new project around the airport that is going to use airport land that can't be sold for any other use. The 2 sites in Calgary are contaminated by fertilizer plants down in the south part of Calgary and have been capped and are highly toxic. Same with the land, large land that is being proposed down in Red Deer for a solar site. Again, a fertilizer plant that has been, tailing ponds have been capped and are totally toxic and can't be used for anything else. So I was concerned when we were proposing the Badger lands, which could be sold for either a business location, and we could get business tax dollars, both revenue to the city from selling the land and potentially business tax dollars to bring into balance our residential versus business tax base, as well as an option of selling that land potentially years down the road for residential land. The other thing in the documents that I had quickly reviewed is a concern around glare from the solar panels, and noting that Badger lands would have the solar panels facing south. And I believe the new final extension of Ray Gibbon would be driving north and then hooking around to connect over to Fowler Way or something like that. Not sure exactly what the plan is, but anybody driving north on Ray Gibbon would be looking directly into the glare off those solar panels as a safety issue. That was a major concern for me, and thinking about has that been considered in the overall plan. But I think in terms of all of the other questions, my thought was being to that we're committing to going ahead and doing this with the 5 items that are listed. But as Mr. LaFleur suggested, if we take items 3, 4, and 5 off, then it's really just a more detailed business analysis and look into seeing whether this actually makes sense from a financial perspective, both the cost and revenue, and the foregone revenue that we wouldn't be getting from selling that land for either business or residential use. And later on, looking at this as coming back to council as the next steps before fully implementing it. The other thing I would note is that, and it just because it came up, but I've been told that we don't recycle plate glass at our glass recycling, only bottles and jars, and those are shipped off to a sandblasting company in BC. So I just wonder if recycling plate glass from solar panels is actually part of our overall plan. But I would say that going forward with this as a study to look at it before it gets finally decided, and bringing it back to council at Q2 for location, business case analysis, and seeing if we're really going to be able to make money on this versus tax revenues from more traditional means is being addressed today as it were my major concerns.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Killick. Is there, I guess, is there anyone willing to move the motion? I guess that's Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Broadhead, are you willing to move a motion? Oh, Ms. Polkowski has a comment. Please proceed.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one particular item, and we can reword the motions, or to make sure that there's support from council to look at the back end of Badger. I think it would be remiss of us to spend 200,000 to go through preliminary and detailed design components if we didn't have an understanding that council was generally supportive of that back end of Badger from a siting perspective. So again, I'm good with removing the motions. I just want to see if there's a way of getting an idea that there is some support from council to contemplate that site.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could make a motion that we hold off the back 15 acres of Badger only, the back portion of Badger. But Councillor Broadhead, I guess your motion.
You could make, Councillor Watkins, you could just put at the end of the first motion, just say, in several sites, including the back end of Badger. And that way it's listed right in there in the first motion, if that's comfortable with Councillor Broadhead. But I'll be out of it now because I'm not on this.
Well, so
You're already in it.
as I was thinking this thing through, my question to you, Ms. Polkowski, then the 200,000, if we were to study multiple sites, for example, then the 200,000 wouldn't be enough, right? You'd have to do site inspections of multiple sites. What are we talking about in terms of dollar value?
It's probably not really a lot more. I would ideally hope to be able to handle it within the 200,000. I'd probably word my kind of RFP that we contemplate maximum of 3 sites. The first 2 starting with a desktop analysis and only proceeding into any detailed design components for one particular site. Because we would never do detailed design of multiple sites. We would need to delineate our sites and then kind of get more refined as we go forward. So I just, again, I understanding not all lands equal. When you look at the information we have today, the location of Badger provides probably the cheapest implementation of a solar program because of the infrastructure, et cetera, and the value of the land.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's part of the investigation, right? But
Yeah.
to the point, I mean, it's not as if the Badger lands don't have some residual value right now. And hence the questions around what, multiple uses might generate. So Mr. Scoble, if I were to move the first 2 motions, and then when it came back to council, you added on specific motions necessary to do the work specific to Badger or any other lands, would that be appropriate? What needs to be actually moved today in committee? Because I'm more than happy to bring 1 and 2 forward, or even 3, but 4 and 5 just seem to be a little bit specific to Badger for me.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the recommendations here. Like, I mean, if you're not specifying a site today or sites to look at, I mean, it seems to me like we should be taking, I don't know, I'm gonna have to work this a bit with Kate on the fly here, but we wouldn't be doing detailed design if we're looking at multiple sites. So recommendation 1 would probably have to have detailed design taken out of it. And then, yeah, it would probably work like that. I don't know. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, and we probably would need an idea of whether we're looking at city-owned parcels only or all land, generally speaking. It just becomes a little more challenging. And again, the same discussion will come forward with any additional parcel, that there is different inherent values that could be built into any parcel out in the world, unless it's kind of undevelopable, which I don't think we have any true undevelopable land. So I don't think it cleans it up that much.
Just for reference, this seems to be trending towards a community amenity site selection with a little bit of technical work. Like what we're hearing here is that we may need to look at, we're almost got to put some front end work with planning and that into looking for sites that may work, and then I guess some conceptual design. I don't know if we're even going to get to preliminary design, but I'll defer that comment to Kate at this point until we actually have a site.
I would like to say that we just look at the back half of 15, that we do first 1 and 2, and then number 3 be that the back 15 acres of Badger be looked at as one of the options, and leave it to staff to justify the other options and come back with, if they don't, because it seems like staff has already looked at the options and figured that this is one of the better ones as a result of distance. So it seems like we're asking them to go back and look at something that's already repeated. But before that, Madam Mayor has a comment.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we could move motions number 1 and 2. I actually think honestly number 3 is not a bad idea, because obviously a boring bylaw has to be approved by council, so it's not pushing anything forward without council approval of the boring bylaw. You just don't want to have that time span between the Q2 2021 report for administration and bringing forward the boring bylaw, would just condense that timeline. And as for number 4, why can't we just say that the 15-acre contaminated site identified on Badgerland, or in Badgerlands identified in today's report, be used to support the long-term development of solar green energy? And then I would still want to actually move number 5, because I'm curious about that report. So I think there's probably room for all 5 recommendations, but maybe just reword the 4th one to identify specifically the 15 contaminated acres on Badger.
Or you could just generalize it and say the back third of Badger, just to provide some flexibility to the design, because it's about capitalizing on that and making sure that we can manage all the pieces in it. So if you keep it to 15 acres specifically, there's no flexibility in terms of how we site it, versus if you go to the back third that's contaminated, then again, we wouldn't spread it out, but it provides, is it a square? Is it a rectangle? Are we squishing it in a corner so that it's as far away from folks as possible?
Would that help?
I would support that we do that and change that 4th condition and move all 5 in, because we also have to realize that not all the council is here, and Councillor Hanson is not here neither as a member of the committee, and so we should probably debate all this in open council, all 5. So I'd be willing to change the 4th position to talk about the back third of Badger and move 5 at this time.
All right, well, so do we actually even need to move 5? I mean, does administration have to be directed to bring back a report, or just
I would support the removal of 5 then. Yeah, I don't think we have to be direct administration. Maybe Kevin could comment on that.
It's nice to have it on record.
Yeah, I think that the only thing we were trying to convey there is, like I said, there's at least one outstanding motion from the community amenities report in January. There was a second thing there to come back with options for Badger, so that's one motion. And
there's definitely a motion on the book to use that land for affordable housing from before West and I were even elected.
Yeah, and I understand there may be some more as well that, longer serving members of council or David may be familiar with. Like, we have to actually do an inventory of all the related motions that need to be dealt with.
that kept, so you'd like that kept then? Administration.
Well, that like I said, that was that was the intent of that. Is just, I mean, it could go, I guess, but we still have to deal with it at council anyway. So we'll be rescinding motions if it's, you know, even if we're looking at the back third of this, right? We still have to deal with at least the January 2020 motion.
Okay.
From my perspective, the idea of a listing of outstanding motions against the Badger land would be appropriate. For sure. So at least we can understand that. But I mean, to your point, Mr. Scoville, I mean, this all has to be affirmed at council in any case. Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I'm more than happy to move 1, 2, 3, and then 4, the back half of Badger lands, back third of Badger lands to be allocated to support. Is that where we're going?
I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, and then.
And
I'm not prepared to move number 5.
Okay. Well, you're the only one who can move it, so.
I can move it.
Well, you can move it. That's right. You are there. That's right. You are a voting member now. You're here. Okay. So, Madam Mayor, do you have any comments?
No, I'll allow Councillor Broadhead to move the first 4, and then I'll move number 5. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Broadhead, you want to make your motion? Then it's the first 4, and the 4th one is amended to say the back third of the Badger lands be allocated.
Okay, well, Madam Mayor, I'm not going to fight you on this. If you want that 5th motion in there, I'm prepared to move it.
I'm a little confused why you don't want it, Councillor Broadhead, because it just seems like a clarification step of what would happen with or without the motion, but it's up to you.
Well, then it's a done deal.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll move all 5.
Okay, with an amendment to the 4th, which is saying that
amend 4, yeah.
back third of the Badger land.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll accept that motion. Would you like to open debate?
Well,
we've been debating for the last hour and a half. So.
Yeah, exactly. Not that I have a whole lot to add, but certainly it's an exciting opportunity to take a look at solar energy within our community. There's potential for significant revenue to our city. Certainly, this is committee just only making recommendations to council, so there's much work yet to be done. And council will need to sign off on this eventually. I think we focused on the backhands of Badger lands, and then there's going to be some work done around determining what the residual value of Badger lands is so that we can make an informed decision when it comes to council. So, and as well, we'll be bringing back a report regarding outstanding motions on the Badger lands, and to take it from there. So those are the 5 motions as I see them, Mr. Chair.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just add that, you know, our community has been asking this council to try to alleviate the pressures from residential taxes. And this is a revenue source that would do that. I just wanted to point out, I didn't have time to hit the agenda package today, but Wednesday of last week, the Recovery Task Force did meet, and I had asked Kate to do a preliminary presentation of this business case to them because they have been asking for alternate sources of revenue. And they passed a motion, and I don't have the words in front of me, but they were 100% supportive of this because they saw it as an opportunity to free up some cash to then maybe go to recovery efforts. So, you know, given our times, I think we need to be looking for some revenue outside of taxes, outside of utilities. And this is a great opportunity and so far a very strong business case. I'm excited to see it go further.
Anyone else? I'd just like to say, I think it's been a lot of work done by administration, and it's a very thorough job. It's a great start here. I think we should keep in mind too that we're not selling the Badger lands if we're not stopping us from selling the Badger lands at a later date if we put a solar farm on it. It's kind of a temporary use that can be 25, maybe 30 years down the road. It can be taken off, and we can still sell that land. So I think just the sell it or use it is, if we use it for this, there's still the option to sell it down the road. We've already sat on it for 15 years. We sit on it for another 15 or 20 years and then sell it. At that time, probably a lot of the contamination would have leached out of the soil because it's salt contamination and it naturally is going to wash out. So as if we're probably just using it as this temporary use, it's probably cleaning itself kind of slowly as we kind of go along. And like the mayor already said, there are so many people here who are down our throat all the time about taxes. And then when we find an alternative here, which can find a way to alleviate taxes, there are a lot of people who don't really want it to happen. So I think it's a great idea. It's one of our only other sources of a way to try to find some other revenue for the city. And I think it's a great idea. So I'm totally supportive of it. Councillor Broadhead to close.
Nothing further.
Okay, we'll call for the vote. Those in favor? Those opposed? That's none. It's unanimous. 3-0. The agenda now. Sorry, I got to go back to the agenda again. Okay, that's it. Adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Broadhead.
He's just waving.
Make that motion too, Mr. Chair.
This is kind of tough with only, well, Kathy's here, 3 members. If Kathy wasn't here, it would have been tough with just 2 members.
All right.
Okay, adjourned. We
All
are
right.
adjourned.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for coming, Mr. Killick. See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.